doing that Death Rattle story was just a trial balloon. And the reception was apparently pretty good because Dennis immediately asked if I would want to do my own comic. And I foolishly agreed to a bi-monthly, and trying to get that first issue out just about killed me. And I was ready to give up. I said, I'm obligated. I've obligated myself to do this, but I don't know if I'm cut out for this.
Initially, it took you quite a while just to formulate the idea for XENOZOIC Tales, if I'm correct. I know you were working other jobs. I think you were a security officer. And then, as you mentioned prior, you were doing illustrations for instruction manuals and that sort of thing. But all that time you were developing, this idea was turning in your head. And if I'm correct, you're writing down notes and trying to sort out everything, the history, how things were going to work. You're doing a lot of research. I know even in this book that I have, you took the time. I'm not sure when you did this, but you created an entire map of the locations and everything. I'm not sure if you did it for the book or if you did it for yourself initially to help you develop the story and to make sure you had everything visually correct. And so tell us about that period, the long period that you were incubating on this idea before you actually set pencil to paper.
Yeah, I was really inspired by two things. I had kind of, as I mentioned before, after my time in college and after that, I had moved away from the idea of doing comics. I had become more of someone who was interested in hopefully establishing myself as a gallery artist. But again, it didn't really engage me because it took me a while to figure it out. But what I really wanted to do was tell stories. But then two things occurred that really drew me back into the idea of doing comics. And one was Bill Stout's book, The Dinosaurs, came out. I saw it in probably around 1980. But all of a sudden, here was a guy, a contemporary artist, who was doing, a subject matter I dearly loved. And he was injecting dynamism into these animals. They had that feeling of movement and power that isn't necessarily part of the more strictly scientific renderings of dinosaurs. And that was like, wow, that was a big, seeing that really sparked me. Then I had that experience where I traded into comics in like 83, 84 and saw all these ECs and just having those in my possession and living with them, the original copies, just, I don't know what it was. It was just one of those things that pushes you over the edge. And that's when I said, I got to try this. So, I'm sitting there doing the guts of a microwave oven or whatever, with my little technical pens and lots of time to daydream about if I had my own comic, what would I do? And I'd always loved the movie King Kong. You add that to Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard and throw in EC Comics. And I just seen The Road Warrior, the George Miller movie, The Road Warrior. And he had all these vehicles, crazy vehicles. And so I had a much more kind of, I don't know what the word would be, a future punk version of Jack and Hannah and XENOZOIC Tales originally. They had more of kind of like a armored up like the characters in The Road Warrior.
Oh, wow.
But then again, like you said, it evolves over time. I started remembering, well, what did I love as a kid too? It was the 50s movies that had, 1950s vehicles racing across the Mojave Desert, and, like I think of the movie, It Came from Outer Space, which has got those great overhead, like there's a helicopter or something flying along this car, and it just always stuck with me, this great vision. And then also, I started remembering, because VCRs were starting to come out, and so old movies were becoming more available. And I remember one of my favorite movies as a kid that really I loved so much was Howard Hawks' Atari. which is guys hunting animals in Africa, and just incredible photography with John Wayne, literally John Wayne, sitting out on the on this car seat apparatus, chair apparatus, on the fender of these whatever they were, these overland vehicles in Africa, lassoing rhinoceroses, and it's exciting. So all these things kind of blended into my head. And like I said, it evolved. It wasn't exactly right at first, but over a couple of years, because I had the mental space to do this, it evolved into Xenozoic. The first Xenozoic story I did was my submission to the publishers.
Okay.
And that actually was reconfigured a bit and appeared in the second issue of XENOZOIC Tales. The first story that was printed, you're right, was in Death Rattle, but that was a new story I generated. They wanted something that would fit into the horror collection. So I did something that was a bit more less adventure and more horror oriented.
So how much control did you have? Being you're brand new to the comic scene, how much control did you have on the story? Did they edit you to death, or did they give you creative freedom?
Pretty much creative freedom. That was Kitchen Sink's credo as Dennis Kitchen had started in the underground, and he was about people maintaining ownership of their content. So I had an excellent editor, Dave Schreiner, who taught me a lot about how to efficiently tell stories, how to chop down unnecessary dialogue, unnecessary adjectives, and keep things moving. And he was a great sounding board when I needed someone to bounce ideas off of. But the ultimate decision to accept or reject any kind of editorial input was all on me, was all up to me.
Excellent. And so how did that work? Like once you submitted your Xenozoic Tales and then they wanted you to do a separate story, was it dependent upon, like, was your publishing of Xenozoic Tales eventually dependent upon how well that first story went? Or did you already have a deal in place? Okay, I'm going to do this story, but then you're also going to publish Xenozoic Tales for me.
No, it was doing that Death Rattle story was just a trial balloon. And the reception was apparently pretty good because Dennis immediately asked if I would want to do my own comic. And I foolishly agreed to a bi-monthly, and trying to get that first issue out just about killed me. And I was ready to give up. I said, I'm obligated. I've obligated myself to do this, but I don't know if I'm cut out for this. But again, luckily, Dennis Kitchen, very flexible publisher, said, well, let's try to do it quarterly. And because I said, I can't keep up this. I can't do what I'm capable of doing I'm slow, So it became a quarterly before I fell off even more. But the book was doing well enough by then that Dennis was happy or tolerant of my getting it out when I did.
Nice.
And it kind of stayed that way on an irregular basis for the next 10 years.
I got the artist edition of Xenozoic Tales, I think.
Yeah.
That came out a few years. Yeah. Now, am I wrong in thinking that those pages were larger than traditional comic book pages? They were like the old EC size pages?
Well, most of them were. I experimented with the size a bit, but most of it was, twice up, 12 by 18, the action size. That's because I found that when I tried working smaller, I did try working a more contemporary, 10 by 15?
Yes,
just to see if it could speed things up, but it really didn't. I just felt more cramped. So I went back to the bigger size, and I stuck with that.
Yeah, I'm wrestling with that myself. I've been experimenting on a couple projects, and I think the 13 by 19 is really, it feels really good. You get your arm in there, but also the detail. I think the point you make of not feeling cramped is huge. And I'm a little heavy-handed when I ink sometimes, especially if I get tired. And I think the larger size really helps in that regard.
I never worked as big as 13 by 19 on a comics page, but Yeah, 12 by 18, even that, you're right, seems a little cramped at times, depending on what I'm doing. I've never gotten over the losing the forest for the trees thing, where I get too much into little noodling things that really aren't necessary on a page full of panels, So
Right.
I'm still fighting that.
Would you say you're more of an illustrator at heart than a comic book artist in the sense, because the way you craft every panel, you just want to drink it in. I don't
I'm a
know.
cartoonist at heart. In here, I'm a
Okay.
cartoonist. But my
Okay.
brain interferes too much, and I become an illustrator up there, and I overthink things that shouldn't be overthought. Again, it's a big. I like the idea theoretically of being able to work one way when I'm doing illustrations, single image thing, and then another way when I'm doing panel progressions. Because you don't need that. You don't want to get bogged down. I look now at my Xenozoic stuff and think, God, this is way too busy. Why was anyone, sure, it's nice that they see all the little detail in one panel, but that's not the point of doing a comic. You should be keeping the reader thigh moving. So I've been working on for the last 8 years, a new Xenozoic graphic novel.
Excellent.
And it's just finding the time to get it done. But
Sure,
I am
that
really
sounds
making a
amazing.
conscious effort to simplify and use the detail where it helps, but not to let it overwhelm and interfere with the reader's eye.
Mark, as our podcast name suggests, we like to get into process here. So you being both the writer and the illustrator, it's not like no one else does that, but it's a unique position. So I'm curious, do you just write everything first before you start drawing like thumbnails, or do you go back and forth to make sure your visuals are working? Do you have everything in your head as you're writing? How does your process work? Take us through from when you first developed the concept for the story, writing it out, and then from your sketches, if you do rough sketches, all the way to pencils and inks.
You're talking about when I'm writing for myself, for my own work?
Exactly.
As opposed to writing okay.
Yeah, for an issue of XENOZOIC Tales, let's take that as an example.
Yeah, well, after I've, scribbled down notes, and sometimes I have to do research if I'm trying to be scientifically accurate about something as a plot point, and I'll spend time assembling notes, but then usually it's just writing out a one-page synopsis of where I want the story to begin, where I want it to end up.
Okay.
And just like, any kind of, I guess, a treatment you'd call it, just basically what are the points I need to hit here. Then what I like to do is I thumbnail out the pages. At that point, I start to think, well, let's say I got 22 pages to work with. I know I've got 22 pages. Well, I've got X number of scenes I got to get through to tell the story. Roughly how many pages or panels do I need to devote to this scene and that scene? And then I start to break it down into thumbnails and just do pretty much stick figure, what needs to be in that panel.
Okay.
And at that point, I'll also sometimes start figuring out what text and dialogue needs to go into those panels, and will it fit? Do I have to, move that dialogue someplace else? Do I have to cut it down? So it's kind of just going back and forth. There's no strict, because again, when I'm working for myself, I'm working on my own schedule. So I don't have to have it done for another artist in, a week or whatever.
Right.
You can be more organic in the process.
I can be more organic. And therefore, like in the graphic novel I'm working on, there's pages being added, pages being subtracted, because I've got, as I rethink things and new ideas come, and I look at a sequence and say, I don't know, are people going to understand this? Do I need to add another page or whatever? Or is this going on too long? Can I boil this down a little further? But then once I have that worked out, I will, on a 9 by 4 or 10 by 14 or 12 by 14 tablet or 9 by 12, I will do bigger, more detailed breakdowns, which I'll then scan in, enlarge to the size they're going to be on the finished board, and print them out, light box them onto the Bristol board, which I'll be doing on the finish, and refine them as pencils further on the Bristol board before going to inks or lettering and then inks. So it's still really old school. I scan in now, which is nice, and I can enlarge in Photoshop and print it out. But I still do everything except if I'm doing coloring. I will do coloring in Photoshop, but everything else I still do by hand, manually.
The handcraftedness of our art form seems to be going by way of the computer more and more, and it's just great to see people who are still doing traditional work. But because Xenozoic Tales does take time, you don't make as much money off of it because you're not in constant rotation. Yet you have to take other jobs that bring in money to support this habit of comics. But that also takes a lot of time. So how do you keep the momentum on a project or on like Xenozoic Tales while you have to go away and do commercial work or write Prince Valiant or whatever to keep a roof over your head?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure. I could go in a lot of different directions with that. Essentially, I think I don't mind having different aspects of my career that I can jump around to. I like having those mental breaks from one thing to be able to pick up on something else. Having said that, I do regret that I've had to take on work that has prevented me I'm about 2/3 done with just as an example, with the Xenozoic graphic novel. But because of other considerations, I had put it aside. It's been put aside for like last couple years. I haven't worked on it at all. And it's just waiting to be finished. But there were all I can say is there's periods where I'm sure you guys know where you get enough work in the bank that you can afford to take some time and work on your own thing. And other times that possibility isn't available.
Yeah.
But I just turned 70. I maxed out my Social Security, and I'm getting that now. And my wife's just started getting hers too.
Excellent.
So there's a little bit of a buffer there now, a little bit of a cushion. And
time to get busy.
Yeah. And, my publisher now is John Fless, and I got to mention this too. And he not only publishes Xenozoic, but he does these collections of my preliminary work and drawings that I've done as commissions. And those are relatively easy to assemble because the work's done, and they bring in, again, it's getting paid for work that's already been done, essentially. It's that secondary market. But the other factor that has really become major for me and helped in recent years is the growing market for original art. And the fact that I can sell, I tend to take on jobs that I know the subject matter will sell. And so that's a big part of my income now too. And I know that if I need a little extra money for something, I can generate my female character, Hannah Dundee, and a dinosaur, and it's going to sell. Someone's going to buy it. So, all these factors, but you're right. It is annoying that sometimes it's like I was really going great guns on the Xenozoic story and I had to put it aside. And I really will have to get that momentum, as you put it, up and running again to get back in gear, to get really moving on that smoothly.
Shane and I really appreciate you guys tuning into our YouTube channel today. If you enjoyed this short conversation and would like to see the entire interview, then please head on over to our Substack, where you'll not only find all of our full-length interviews, but a ton of super interesting posts that we've created just for you guys. Link is in the description box below. So until next time, thanks for watching.